Hello, everybody, and welcome to our another episode of our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topics. And this season, we have guests joining us. So, first of all, Rupert, hello, how are you?
I'm living the dream. Every day is another dream day. Every day is a learning day.
As
And the weather
always.
remains fine today. There we go. That's as good as it gets.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, I get a lot of energy from you living your dream. So, yes, I can say that I'm living my dream.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
Today we have Alan Susi on our show. Welcome, Alan. Rupert, would you like to introduce Alan today to us?
I think Alan will do a much better job of introducing himself than myself. But I just met Alan recently, and but I think we have lots of mutual friends. We were just talking to a mutual friend, and everyone speaks extremely highly of you, Alan, for good reason. But you know, you're the leader of a function that's related to that you can introduce at S&P. So I'll leave it to you to give your potted history.
Absolutely. Great to be on the show with both of you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Alan Susi. I am the VP and global head of organizational planning and analytics at S&P Global, the most recent name change for my title. But I've been in the workforce planning, org design, or HR business partner space for a better part of the last 15 years, and joined S&P about 5 years ago, with kind of that evolution of work from people partnering into org design and workforce planning, and recently really trying to lean in heavily on what is org planning and analysis or analytics for us here at S&P Global.
Amazing. And so, and obviously, extremely happy to hear the name of the function. Um, Maybe we can double click on that in a second. But
Yeah.
before we do, just it'd be great to learn a little bit more about you, Alan. So, where did you grow up? Where did you start working? Just a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely, absolutely. So got into. I'll go all the way back. Grew up in Rhode Island in the United States, and went to school in the South. Got to Washington D.C. for some work, and ultimately got my MBA right around the time of the financial crisis. So I watched the financial crisis kind of unfold in DC, seeing some crazy stuff happening. And as I graduated, a little nerve-wracking to get into the business world, but I joined Fannie Mae shortly after kind of everything had really evolved at Fannie Mae. And for those that are not stateside, Fannie Mae is definitely one of the players in the financial crisis. But I joined with kind of a need to focus on how does the organization change and evolve in that post-financial crisis space. So I grew up at Fannie Mae. I spent time in org development, org design. Was a chief of staff to the finance partner, which I will leave for a little while further into the conversation of how I've learned how to partner with finance, and ultimately became a workforce planner and people partner or HR business partner to leadership in the company. And that was a great experience. And I found my way to S&P Global and at another crazy time in the world during COVID in 2020, and joined S&P, not knowing that there was some really interesting opportunities coming up that ultimately resulted in the biggest merger announced in 2020, which was S&P Global merging with IHS Markit, another financial services and information services provider. We became a $160 billion entity that closed in March of 22, and I spent my time doing org design, workforce planning, and I've been recently running people analytics and bringing all that together into ultimately what is today org planning and analytics. And the focus there is again people analytics, or workforce planning, and our people data strategy to enable kind of the next level of growth in the people team in the company around being a skills-based organization, really transforming digitally and using AI both for ourselves and how we build AI into the products and services we do for our customers.
Alan, this is fantastic because not often do we see all of this being folded into one leadership or even so well integrated. The talent planning, the org design, org effectiveness work, the analytics. We always talk about that these are such integrated functions, but they always reside elsewhere, and then there are political landmines between them to cross. And so, how did this happen? What what did this happen organically, or you always um, worked towards it's very fascinating to understand your story about that.
Um, there's a quote. Oh my God! And now I'm going to miss the author. Um, Hemingway,
Okay.
where he says things happen slowly and then suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
That was how I ultimately got into org planning and analytics.
Well
It
said.
was a number of situations that I grew and continuously learned from, and turned it into a passion. And ultimately, where I am today, I think I built enough experiences and trust, and by being compassionate and empathetic with all my partners, that they said, "Hey, let's do this and really lean in here." And just been very fortunate to grow in that way. It's almost like I've practiced your books, Rupert, down to the chapter, but that's just how it's gone. It took 15 years, but
Down to the
it's happened.
title as well.
Down to the title. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I told
fantastic.
Rupert at our first conversation I did not retitle this just because of the book, but it definitely had something to do with the book. So
Love that.
Mm.
Love that. And so I don't know now or later, but I would love to understand that what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned in your journey that led you to think about this integrated way of operating? And many a times when we think about that, our uh, we ask ourselves that what was the toughest thing to get to that hurdle, like what was the mindset shift, not in your mind but in others mind, that you had to bring along. So what were some of the lessons, what are some of the mindset shifts that you had to do? If you can share with us, that would be fantastic.
yeah, I will start with, just in my mind, just to give it the context I think is needed for how I worked with others. But for me, it was failure. I had to see how where workforce planning didn't work, or where we couldn't move beyond resource and operational planning, to do workforce planning, or the challenges with not having the right data or having the right philosophy, right? And that's just, again, through a long period of time. But how I've seen partners react to it, and again, it helped me change how I interacted with them, was if they could only focus on one thing, someone had to help bring the gaze up or bring the view across. And that was critical, because you can talk to a finance partner and they're going to see things a certain way. You can talk to an HR business partner or a talent expert or a talent acquisition expert, and they are focused on doing their thing as well as they can. It's kind of built into the capability of the organization or the structure of the jobs or roles that we create. And I just found that for me, someone needed to bring them across and bring that information together. So my viewpoint has always been, be as empathetic as possible, be as compassionate as possible, and people will come along and start seeing that. And when you do that enough, they're going to understand how to then elevate their gaze and think in a more organized or broader lens.
And so, if we take an example, you went through a big post-merger integration, the largest in the year. I mean, very.
Yeah.
So how did applying integrating all this and having this capability help with that? And you know, as an example, did you get the quote unquote synergies up faster? Could you track them? Are you still on top of them today? So if someone asks you, where are you with those synergies? Most people forget, and that it gets brushed under the carpet. Um, I'm making an assumption here. I haven't asked you this question, so I'm hoping
Yeah.
you're smiling. So that's good. So yeah, talk us through that.
Yeah, I working at a company like S&P Global, disclosures, clarity is of the utmost importance, and I can confidently say that we've met our targets or are in the process of meeting our targets, for synergies, or the expectations related to that merger. Again, we're 3 years later at this point from, literally 3 years and about a week later, from the closure of that deal, which has been fantastic. And we did our synergy work, ahead of time, and our cost synergy work, I should say, ahead of time. That's all in kind of our public disclosures. But I think we did it in the right way, in order to navigating maybe one of the more complex M&A periods you could possibly imagine, um, because we had this integrated view, because leaders were making really thoughtful decisions, and there was a clear partnership between the people and finance team, and everybody was doing it to get to what the ultimate, outcomes of the merger was, which is to become adaptive, growing company that really impacts all markets. And so that was really fun to be part of, but also it took time during that, effort, to actually then achieve those outcomes. But I think to answer your question, Rupert, we nailed it, uh, pretty well.
And your body language just shows that you did, right?
Yeah.
I can see from your body language and your smile if people are listening, and just to know that, because most of the time people don't. Right? And every time I go to a conference about M&A or transformation, you hear the same thing over and over again: 80% fail. And why? Well, we don't have it's not integrated. We don't have control of the data. We don't have a clear process. We're disconnected. And so for you, to sit here, comfortably saying, no, we achieved it before time, and we're still on it, and we're still measuring it. I just think, and you've distilled that, but it's just credit to you and the entire team for doing this, and the fact that you're living the integrated dream, if we can call it that, is just fantastic. So one of the challenges that we discussed this on with someone else earlier, and it's the why. So why do
Yeah.
this? Why be integrated? How did you win the why argument? How did you convince the leaders, or why were the leaders convinced that this capability, the OP&A capability, should be brought together under one leadership, integrated? What helped? What made them? What was the business case that got them to the point of saying, no, we should do this?
I think we've been in a really fortunate situation where, like we just talked about, the merger was great. We executed it, I think, about as well as any group can. We've seen, you look back at history, financial, we're doing fantastic. We also have managed, a CEO succession, and that is, as at the time of this taping, I mean, that's months ago, but again, that is an integration, right? That is a reemergence of our strategy, of our philosophy, and we're just really fortunate to have great leaders who got us to this point and who are taking us forward. But I think that viewpoint, we talk a lot about enterprise mindset, in the organization, and what does that mean? It means that you have to be thinking outside, or again, I use that term, like, elevate your gaze. Our leaders are encouraging that type of behavior, by creating working groups, by organizing ourselves into really clear goals and outcomes. And so the idea that we have to partner and collaborate is kind of built from our leadership. Our new, chief people officer, Girish Ganasan, he, calls it kind of being people forward, and trying to make sure that we're thinking about how we bring our people along, but that also implies that we're looking forward, right? So that brings planning into it. And so what that does is that all those pieces come together, and everybody's saying, well, we've got to think ahead. We've got to do it together, because I don't have all the information. So I have to find out where it might be, or how can I go get it, and not necessarily just to own it, but to bring it together. And that has manifested very quickly. So I give great credit to my leadership. And I'm just fortunate enough to have a lot of the experiences or the data, which has helped quite a bit in making that happen. But it's an evolution as well.
So inferring, if I can infer, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like it was a business case that was put together and people sat down and said, right, let's do this. It was more culturally, we have to lean in, we have to think forward. culturally, we just know we have to collaborate and have an enterprise view. So it was really, it was just natural that you formed. It was it
Yeah.
was it was deductive, and so you just acted according to those principles. And just is that a
Yeah,
fair summation?
I do. And again, if I think about past experiences, and Rupert, I think you've seen this in so many different organizations. Where it doesn't work is where you're not learning from the past, or you're trying to do it too prescriptively or be the best practice. It needs to come from those natural experiences. Like, so if I take it back to kind of the timing of the merger, right? As a huge enterprise activity, what we experienced was a pandemic, then the Great Resignation, then the stabilization of the Great Resignation, the shifting of markets, right? So as a company, we're experiencing that, but as a people team, we're experiencing that. And so that brought about this ability to, well, you have to think fluidly. You have to be, you can't be react, you have to start getting proactive. And so we use those ideas very, very clearly. So context and concepts started coming together in order to drive it. So that's kind of how we operated, right? And leaders, being really good leaders, invite those people that bring that together. And so when we coalition of the willing, whatever you want to call it, you start building those networks, and people start getting things done, knowing, well, I can't solve this alone, right? So in the merger, yeah, you're in the middle of a pandemic. No, there's no hiring, right? Then all of a sudden, everybody's leaving. How do you manage that when you're trying to integrate an organization? Well, you try to take advantage of it. You try to manage, like any good HR team will do, is you try to manage the hiring, the mobility or movement and retention of your people. We just, tried to keep it simple, put a lens on it, and said, okay, well, we got to execute this. And that drove it. I don't mean to be too simplistic about it, but that's kind of how I try to talk about it, is like, keep it simple. I could be the most strategic person ever, but you got to deliver.
I think you summed it in that line that you say any good HR team would do it. I think a lot of people do it, but then they start to spin around and, go in that treadmill where they start doing things, but it's not making any progress because they're not able to connect the dots between what is not working. They're just being very prescriptive about going. So that brings me to another question: that what are you usually looking for in your team members, in your peers who you collaborate as you bring all of this together? What are some of the key power skills that people need to have? Because we're talking so much about skills economy and, but there is inherently a different kind of thinking that is needed in order to make all of this move. And what is those in your mind?
It's a great question. I th Again, I might sound like I'm like I've got the OP&A book open, but I think it's thinking about capabilities and competencies, right? So I think system thinking is maybe one of the most important elements, because you have to be thinking broadly. You can't go too deep in one area, but you can find the right people that can. And so I've found that creating that environment by thinking system wide, or working with people that build that system wide thinking, is really, really important. So kind of the moniker that we're taking up in our team right now is, workforce planning or org planning is a team sport. Because if you're going to get system wide, everybody's got a job to do, and it means that we all have to be there. I think then the other side of that, when I get into the competencies that are needed, I mean, we need to have a good data strategy. We need to understand how the business strategy and the people team and the finance team strategy all play a part, so that we can fill in gaps, right? So right now, we know we need to continue our digital transformation. We're trying to invest in that. We're trying to make sure we focus on that, so we can fill in those pieces in the right period of time, to then get more predictive or get more strategic or get our gaze even higher. And so that is how we've kind of brought it in. So the other kind of more power behavior parts that I would say, beyond system thinking, is our team. We really try to practice this idea of empathy, compassion, and trust. So we really try to start with, I'm listening. I'm trying to understand as many broad perspectives as possible, which is encouraged by the system thinking. Then compassion. For us, it's we're going to lean in, we're going to prioritize really well, and we're going to lean in and do the work potentially on behalf of others to get it moving and done the right way. And I think those two skills create the final one of trust. And if you have that, right, if you're saying, I hear you, I'm going to do, 80, 90% of the work and get 10 to 20% of the benefit. You then, when you build that team, and again, I use another idea of game theory, right? If you're all pulling together and it's not about you, it's about we're going to execute far better. And I feel like an organization that I'm in now, and the people that I'm around, like, think that and have that, and that really then manifests in execution and delivery.
Beautiful. And I think I have one more question as a follow up on that before I
Yeah, yeah.
take all of the air. I would like to understand that how did you then start thinking about this systems thinking, getting the right capability in the organization to now build your processes? Because again, like, performance management, talent planning, compensations and rewards, these are very laid out processes from HR perspective, and therefore they start to become more and more mature. How do we build this as a part of our business rhythms and business processes so that they start to get maturity? Because then again, it will be like you do it one time, you're never good at it, and then it's very painful.
You're absolutely right. And by thinking about it as a team sport, right? You're never going to have as practitioners that we never have enough workforce planners. We never have enough OP&A analysts, right? We always want more, more, more. And so if it's a team sport, we know that we're going to have areas that are higher on the growth curve, areas that are less mature, areas that need to change a behavior or skill set. But if you're bringing everybody to the table, you can kind of counterbalance, right? So if we have to make changes in a total rewards activity, we know that might be a gap right now, and we're well advanced in our talent philosophy here, or vice versa, right? It can be anything. But we're able to have those folks at the table, talk about what the gaps are, and when we're seeing those challenges come up or percolating up, and everybody's on board, then we can invest in scale and the right capital. So if we think system wide and we know there are gaps in the systems, or again, very agile oriented, like if the whip on this is too slow, or there's a problem in the operations there, we can then go fix it. And so that gets down to then the practical application of, okay, we've got to execute this thing over in a function here in order to stack the right amount of work to get it done, right? So if you're trying to build a skills-based organization, do you have the right job architecture? It's good. Could it be better? Where your biggest problem areas? And those are the kind of conversations that we try to have and encourage. And all these great thinkers and people might only have their own view, or they might be required to have a very focused area, like a HR business partner. Great, let's gather that intel so we can make the right scaled investments to build the capability that we think the org needs.
One of the key areas that you are most passionate about and you think is most critical is your relationship with finance, and in particular FP&A. So OP&A and FP&A being aligned and connected. And so it'd be great just to hear you talk about practically, well, what were some of the issues prior to you succeeding? What was some of the felt pains and maybe some horror
Yeah.
stories? And then how have you made it work? And then what is the benefit? Like, how does that feel when it's working well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this one comes up the most for me whenever I'm talking to folks of, like, how do you actually execute it? And I kind of started off in that conversation around, well, you got to fail sometimes. So some of the real pain points in my career have been around trying to solve a strategic problem with people that are outside of your function, and not hearing what their real challenges are, right? So if I take you back, kind of my experience, I started or I had a great experience in the finance organization as chief of staff to the CFO at Fannie Mae. And it was amazing, exhilarating. I didn't know how finance organizations run. So it gave me this real experience, right, to being deeply empathetic about what the challenges a finance organization faces, seeing how they have the ear of business leaders, and saying, I want that. But they spent decades building that, right, as a kind of function growing across all industries. And when I came back into the people team, I kind of I knew that that's where I needed to focus my energy. And the failures were you get kind of caught up too much in your own stuff when you get back into a function, right? So if we're going to go build a workforce planning capability, and you're not hearing how they think about literally basics like how do you count headcount? How do you define cost of workforce? How does the business need to understand that versus an HR business partner? HR business partner experience might be incredibly irrelevant because they're only making decisions about financial allocation of cost. And we failed multiple times, like, and not just me, but with groups of people around just not listening enough. And so what I kind of decided was when I got into the next organization, I was going to lean in hard on that other side, and listen more than anybody could possibly listen, and then say, you know what, I'm going to try to help you solve this the right way. Break a few eggs, but that's what you kind of have to do to show that you're listening and thinking about the way a business leader or finance partner
And
needs it
in a
to
way,
happen.
did you not have an unfair advantage because you're the chief of staff to the CFO? So a chief of staff is a really intimate role, and you're part of the leadership team. You're part of every the blows every day. The CFO would have been confiding in you about a whole bunch of different things, and so part of your success will come from the learned experience of actually working alongside a CFO and the finance group. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's imagine you didn't have that, or someone doesn't have that. Is it, should they then try to get that experience by some other hook or crook? If you're going to be the OP&A lead and you haven't lived in finance for a period, you're probably going to struggle versus if you have.
100%. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, of course. I had a great mentor in the CHRO at the time, at Fannie Mae. He said, you need to understand the business. And I need someone to bring this lens to the new CFO. And so it was a fortunate opportunity, but I think I say that because I don't think it has to be like you don't have to be a chief of staff. You don't even need to become an FP&A person. But are you listening to whatever, or seeing on a regular basis, Rupert, to your point, what the business really needs? So can you get into a business role? Can you get into a finance role? Can you get in? It could be any number of elements that revolve around how the business operates. I think chief of staff is a great opportunity. It's not one that I probably would go do again, not because I did it, but I think everybody should get an experience, and you see it in a lot of chief HR officers who have had experience either, in finance. Maybe they started on the desk, on right. Maybe they were a trader. Maybe they were doing something else, but they understand intimately how it actually manifests. And if you can be closer to understanding P&L or financial statements or whatever it might be, you have a leg up on others because you're taught to actually think more broadly.
Yeah.
And this brings me to another thought that came up is that it's not about what you do, but how you do it and what you learn in that role, right? So you can be chief of staff and just put your blinkers on and not thinking about broadly. And so then you're not going to make much about it. If you're not putting that, the three letters that you said, Alan, empathy and compassion in your role, and not building that trust, then you're not able to fully integrate into that role. So it's not about just what, but how you do it is with the intention is also important.
Absolutely, because people have to build that trust. I mean, if you haven't had the experience, you have to spend even more time
Yeah.
listening, right? Or spend more time, because there are people on my team that have not done what my experience, and I don't expect everybody to have my particular experience. But one of my key lieutenants on the team had an analytics background, a little bit of a learning background, and I was like, you are going to spend months with the finance team thinking about understanding how they build their headcount reports, their total cost of workforce. What is the difference between a run rate and a P&L? And then you're get like, what do you think we should be doing? And it's that ability of like they trusted that team member because they were in the fire with them, and then they did the work, right? And she's amazing, and I don't know what I would do without her. She now is the most trusted person, I think, from the people team that works with the finance team, and that worth its weight in gold, right?
And you know, if you can't get into the role, you can still say, "Show me, walk me through how you build your budget. Walk me through what are the issues." You can people I find are very generous with their time. If you ask them for help, and there's nothing like walking the floor, like and so just you know to say, "Can we spend an hour? Can you just talk me through this?" And if you don't know how to read a P&L, you know, anyone, and you know, go to the FP&A. Just help make me. And it's no shame to say, assume I know nothing. Start at the basics. They will love that. Most people would love to explain that to you, and then you know what, you've learned it. And if you get caught up and you're learning, and it's that's just a mindset, right?
I've never I maybe not never, but I can't remember the last time I've heard someone say, "No, I don't want to tell you about what I do."
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
That is so true. That is so true.
They love
yeah,
talking about it. You just
yeah,
got to pull it out of them, right?
yeah.
Yes.
Let
Yeah,
them go, right? Because they just let me talk about how difficult my life is, and you'll help them just by listening, because it's rewarding for
absolutely.
people to share. So
Well, and especially if you've built that backlog, or kind of we think about it as a little bit like political capital, but if you've built that backlog of trust with others, and they say, "Oh, here comes the well now the OP&A team or Alan's team or whatever you call it," and they open the door faster because it's not about me or my team. It's about we're solving the problem, we're doing it collaboratively, and you're probably going to get something out of it, right? More times than not, you're going to get something out of it, and that's the way we operate. So you're always going to get everybody's insight, and again, it's how well you prioritize, how well you give, how much time you give to the most important things. You can quickly upskill and be aware of the things you didn't know before.
Absolutely. Alan, your team is at a place which is like at a maturity model, which is aspirational for a lot of teams out there. So, what is next for your team and you as a leader? That what is the next level of capability and maturity of that capability that you are aiming at?
It's a great question. You know, yeah, we're aspirational. For others, maybe it's still really hard, and we have a lot of growing to do. There's always more work. So I think for us, we are trying to just make sure that we deliver the next best or right thing, that we support the strategy of the new CEO, the new CPO, the new CFO here at S&P at the time of this, but it could be any leader, and then just solving those problems, right? So if we don't have the most mature strategic workforce planning practices, we at least are at the table effectively supporting whatever level of maturity a business or a leader or a group has to deliver an outcome. And at that whole time, we know then we're getting better and better and better. So I think of us as, yeah, maybe we've got like, I think, I know you might not know like American football teams, like we have an amazing offense. We're trying to build the capability of the team to go win a Super Bowl. That's how I think about it. I watch way too much American football. So it's just, hey, we're going to get better. We're going to do our job. There's an elegance to what we can do, but we have to go execute on our strategy. So that's where we're taking it. Because let's say pretend we have this conversation 3 years from now. I want to tell you all about what we've done to really deliver or continuously deliver the value. I think we've shown to the
and then
organization
once
the
you win your
company.
Super Bowl, you know you want to win it next year,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then you want to be the
yep,
team that won it the most times. So
yeah.
on we go. Brilliant.
Exactly. It's like the Insight 222 group does a great thing they call about like the A teams, and it's all about driving real value. I want to be an A team over and over again, right? I want to be comfortable saying year over year, you can identify me and my team. and our organization as A teams, and that's the goal, right? Just be in the playoffs, be in the championship, and execute. So
I think we've reached the point of running out of time here. So, Alan, we always finish with a tool and a trap. Um, there will be many that you could talk about, but if you have to pick one tool and one trap, what would it be?
wow. One tool. I mean, I hesitate to quadruple down on anything, but I think the tool that is best is um, building the right data pipeline or collaboration with the finance team. That is, I think it's the unlock for any org planning and analytics practitioner, or frankly any people team. Like, you need to be on the same page as your business leader and finance partner. There's that kind of three-headed monster. Like, I think that's the thread that pulls through. Um, I think the trap is getting too caught up in your own stuff. I have to, at the same time, I can feel very confident bragging about what we do as a team. I don't make everybody happy. And if a trap comes up, well, we've heard you do great things. Can you help us on this? And it's not aligned to a priority. The trap is saying yes to the things that get you away from your number one thing. I don't know if you read Greg McCune, kind of Essentialism. Is a lovely, lovely book. um Focus on the one thing, right? You might have all this energy that spins out all over the place, but if you're prioritizing well and you
I've
know
read
how
the
to
one
push
thing.
back.
So
go
I've read the one thing. So yeah, I've actually read that a couple of times. I've got the name of the author, but the one thing is a fantastic book.
and it's just knowing that, right,
Yeah,
Rupert? Like, as long as you're
totally,
laser focused,
totally.
you
It's
know how
And
to
also what
say
you
no.
do in order to create a habit that you just start focusing on one thing, and then
Yeah,
everything still, the system thinking starts to move in the flywheel. It starts the
yeah,
flywheel for it.
yeah.
So love that.
exactly.
Love that
Yeah,
because
It's a
and it's a
very easy
trap
book to
because you want to
start.
make people happy, right?
yes.
Yes,
Like, and especially if people like what you do, you're just never going you're never going to make everybody happy.
it's hard to say no.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
really hard to say no.
And it guts me as like
Yeah,
as a practicing people partner.
yeah,
We love to say yes. We
yeah.
love to help people.
We love to be people pleasers. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we're people, so
yeah.
it's very difficult to say no. But that's we try to give them the clarity, but it is by far, in my experience in the people team, anywhere I've been, is the biggest trap. You say yes too much.
Love it, Alan. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
I mean, these are really practical tools and traps that we can listen to and utilize right away. So, thank you so much, Alan. It was such a pleasure to have you on our show. And I learned a lot from listening to you today. And kudos to what you're doing at S&P and how you're building this amazing muscle for the organization and inspiring others to follow your lead. So, thank you so much.
And it's nice to say thank you to the, is it VP of
Yeah,
OP&A?
yes, that's right.
So it's nice to chat to the VP of OP&A from one of the leading organizations in the world, from S&P. So well done for your work, and congratulations, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for the inspiration. Cheers to many more people being working with this title and this team.
On that, thanks, Alan.
Thanks,
Thank
Alan.
you.
Thank you, Rupert. Until next time.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.